Every morning, Kyle Redding untied his old trawler from Pier 7 before the sun reached the horizon. At 47, he'd spent more years at sea than on land, patrolling the quiet inlets of the Oregon coast where crab traps and seabirds outnumbered neighbors. Locals knew him as the man who didn't say much, just waved once and disappeared into the fog. But Kyle wasn't just fishing, he was watching. A former Coast Guard rescue diver turned recluse, he had his reasons for retreating. Years ago, one mission went sideways. A boy died. And Kyle never forgave himself. Now, he lived simply, quietly, ing only to the tide. That morning, the water was still, the air sharp. Just as he cut the engine to check his nets, a flicker on the horizon caught his eye, a small boat drifting off course, its radio silent. Through his binoculars, Kyle saw the vessel more clearly, a white motorboat, its bow listing slightly, no one waving, no distress flares. Odd. He adjusted course and approached slowly, engine humming low. As he neared, a shape suddenly lunged up, someone had been crouched near the stern. A teenage girl, pale, shivering, with a deep cut across her forehead. "Help, he's still down there," she gasped, pointing overboard. Kyle threw anchor, dove in without hesitation. The water was freezing, visibility murky. But 10 feet down, tangled in rigging, he found a man, unconscious but alive. With effort, he hauled him up, coughing and limp. Kyle radioed the Coast Guard but got only static. Strange. He tried again. Still nothing. Then, just as he started the trawler to tow them back to shore, a low, metallic groan echoed beneath the hull, followed by a shadow surfacing directly in his path. A massive, dark shape broke the surface with impossible silence, sleek, angular, and unmistakably military. A submarine. But not one Kyle recognized from his Coast Guard days. Its tower bore no flag, no markings. Just smooth, black steel and a single open hatch. The girl on Kyle's deck screamed and ducked behind him. The injured man stirred faintly, eyes opening for a split second, then panic. "Not them, not again," he rasped. Before Kyle could respond, the submarine let out a deep pulse, like sonar, but sharper, almost, directed. Kyle's radio crackled to life. A voice, cold and mechanical, issued a single command: remain still. Do not transmit. Then silence. The submarine didn't move closer, nor away. It simply hovered, blocking Kyle's path home. The girl clutched his sleeve. "They weren't supposed to find us," she whispered. Kyle realized, this wasn't a coincidence. He'd just rescued someone he wasn't meant to find. Kyle cut the engine. The ocean fell into eerie silence, broken only by the faint hiss of water slipping along the submarine's hull. The hatch remained open, like a silent threat. Kyle glanced at the girl, then the man, who was now semi-conscious and clutching his ribs. "Who are they?" Kyle asked. The girl hesitated. "They're not American. I don't think they're even supposed to be here." She looked over her shoulder. "We escaped last night. They were experimenting on him." Kyle's jaw tightened. It sounded insane, until he noticed the man's neck, a surgical scar, fresh and angry, ran just above the collarbone, with what looked like embedded metal beneath the skin. The girl added quietly, "If they get us back, he won't survive." Kyle didn't answer. He just turned, grabbed the throttle, and made a decision. He was going to run. Straight through the blockade. The instant Kyle gunned the throttle, the submarine reacted. A siren, low and pulsing, erupted from its hull, and 2 unmanned drones shot from beneath its surface, skimming the waves in a tight arc. "Hold on," he shouted, gripping the wheel as the old trawler's engine roared louder than it had in years. Water churned behind them. One drone veered sharply, scanning the boat with red sensors. The girl ducked, the man groaned and tried to speak, but couldn't. Kyle swerved hard toward a jagged line of sea stacks, hoping to lose them in the rocks. One drone clipped a stone outcropping and disappeared in a burst of spray. The other stayed close. Kyle yanked a flare gun from under the seat. "We're not going quietly," he muttered. He fired. The flare struck the drone's wing, enough to send it spiraling. For now, they were clear. But something told him that was just the beginning. As the cliffs faded behind them and the drone's wreckage sank below the waves, Kyle finally dared to slow the engine. The girl wrapped the man in one of Kyle's spare blankets, whispering something in a language Kyle didn't recognize. He opened the storage hatch and pulled out a med kit. "Name?" he asked. The man blinked slowly. "Jonas," he whispered hoarsely. The girl added, "And I'm Lyra." "We're not what they told you." She hesitated, then rolled up Jonas's sleeve. Embedded beneath his skin, faintly glowing, was a small triangular device, no bigger than a coin. "They were testing neural control," she said. "He broke free. But they'll want him back." Kyle stared at the implant. It wasn't just tech, it pulsed like it was alive. He looked from Jonas to Lyra, then out toward the horizon. "All right," he said quietly. "Then let's make sure they never find you again." Kyle steered toward a secluded cove he hadn't visited in years, a jagged inlet surrounded by cliffs, where smugglers once hid during Prohibition and where he used to dive during his Coast Guard years. The radar was off, the comms silent. No signals, no beacons. Just how he needed it. As the boat slipped into shadow, Kyle cut the engine and exhaled. Lyra kept watch while Jonas lay resting, his pulse steady but weak. Kyle stepped onto the rocks to scout the area. That's when he saw it, an old Coast Guard buoy, long decommissioned, bobbing gently near shore. Except now, it blinked. Once. Then twice. He froze. That buoy shouldn't be active. And only one person would know to activate it. A name came to his mind, Reese. Kyle's former commanding officer. The last man who ever trusted him. And maybe, the only one who might believe him now. Kyle stared at the blinking buoy, heart pounding. Reese had cut ties with him years ago after the failed rescue, the one that left a boy dead and Kyle drowning in guilt. Still, Kyle approached, lifted the buoy's panel, and flipped the emergency override. A voice cracked through the hidden speaker. "Pier 7 Protocol. Identity?" Kyle hesitated, then answered, "Reading. Authorization Echo, Delta, 4-2. Silence. Then came the reply, "You picked a hell of a time to crawl out of the grave, Kyle." Reese's voice hadn't changed, gravelly, skeptical, tired. "I need a ghost channel," Kyle said. "Off-grid. I've got passengers the government's not supposed to know about." A pause. "You've got 30 seconds. Talk." Within minutes, Reese transmitted a set of encrypted coordinates, an old drydock once used for naval training, now decommissioned and buried beneath layers of bureaucratic neglect. Kyle committed them to memory, then destroyed the message. Back on the trawler, Lyra was pacing. "They've recalibrated the tracking signal," she said, pointing to a low-frequency pulse now blinking faintly on Jonas's arm. "They can find us, even here." Kyle nodded, already reaching for a toolkit. "Then we cut it out." But before he could begin, Jonas stirred and whispered something that made Lyra freeze. "No, it's not just a tracker. It's a key." Kyle lowered his tools. "A key to what?" Jonas met his eyes, tired, haunted. "To everything they're hiding." And suddenly, Kyle knew, saving them wasn't the endgame. It was the opening move in a war no one else knew had started. Kyle didn't sugarcoat it: submarine, drones, implants, a girl on the run. When he finished, Reese muttered, "God help us." Then, another click. "I'll send you a location." But if you're lying. I'm not. I know, Reese said. That's what scares me. The dry dock was exactly where Reese promised, a rusting skeleton of steel half-swallowed by coastal fog, hidden beneath a shuttered fisheries compound. Kyle guided the boat into a side slip, helped Jonas ashore, and moved fast. Inside the main hangar, rows of obsolete sonar consoles and comm towers loomed in silence. Reese was already there, leaning on a crutch, a pistol visible at his hip. His eyes landed on Jonas and narrowed. He's not just some lab rat, is he? Kyle shook his head. They implanted something in him, he says it's a key. Reese led them deeper into the hangar. Show me. When Lyra exposed the triangular implant beneath Jonas's skin, Reese's expression changed. Not surprise. Recognition. He stepped back, breath shallow. I've seen that symbol before, he murmured. Then he turned to a locked filing cabinet and pulled out a folder stamped, Defense Project, Phoenix/Deepwater Prototype, Terminated. Reese flipped open the folder, pages yellowed and fragile. Inside were diagrams, classified memos, and grainy photos, one showing a younger version of Jonas in military uniform, strapped to a gurney. Project Phoenix was never about weapons, Reese said grimly. It was about neural integration. Turning humans into decentralized command units. Living satellites. Kyle scanned the page, stunned. Why terminate it? Reese shook his head. They didn't. They buried it, moved it offshore, privatized it under ghost contractors. That implant? He tapped the diagram. It's a node. With the right conditions, it can unlock a network of hidden assets, submarines, drones, even satellites, off the books, off the radar. Lyra's eyes widened. Then Jonas isn't a fugitive. Reese nodded. He's a walking master key. The hum deepened into a vibration underfoot, barely perceptible at first, then rising like a distant engine awakening. Reese bolted upright. That's not from the grid. That's tunneling resonance. Kyle glanced at the floor. They're under us? Reese grabbed a duffel from the cabinet and tossed Kyle a flare gun. Not just under, we're sitting on top of an old comm relay. If Jonas is active, they'll come for the signal, not just him. Sparks flickered from a nearby console. A screen blinked on, unprompted, static, then a message in red, Retrieve Asset/Phase 3 Protocol, Live Capture. Lyra backed toward Jonas, who was barely upright. We have to move now. Outside, the fog was no longer still. It pulsed, unnaturally, like something breathing just beyond the coastline. Kyle grabbed the wheel. We're not hiding anymore. They weren't just escaping now. They were bringing the truth to the surface. And just as those words settled in, the power in the hangar flickered. A low hum began to rise, from underground. Something had found them. Under cover of thick coastal fog, Kyle steered the trawler along a rarely used inlet, one known only to a few retired Coast Guard veterans. Reese sat below deck, rerouting signals through old Navy satellites still patched into his clearance. Lyra monitored Jonas, whose skin now emitted a soft bioluminescent glow from the implant, pulsing every few seconds like a signal seeking something. He's sinking, she said. Whatever they built inside him, it's activating. Kyle kept his eyes forward but muttered, then we give it a target. Reese looked up. You're serious? Kyle nodded. We stop running. We force them into the light. Their plan was dangerous, transmit a falsified extraction code from Jonas's implant and lure the enemy's command vessel into U.S. territorial waters, where laws still mattered. But time was short. And something else was closing in behind them, too fast for sonar, too quiet for waves. Reese finished encoding the extraction signal, routing it through Jonas's implant with trembling fingers. Once it transmits, he warned, they'll come fast. You'll have 10 minutes, maybe less. Kyle gave a sharp nod. That's all we need. Lyra steadied Jonas as Rhys initiated the pulse. Instantly, the air seemed to tighten, radios hissed, the ship's compass spun erratically. On a monitor, a digital wave flared outward from their position, reaching satellites, bouncing through classified frequencies. Then came the response. A pinpoint blip appeared offshore, accelerating toward them. That's their command vessel, Rhys muttered. She shouldn't even exist anymore. Moments later, all electronics on the boat went dark. Not offline, dead. Jonas gasped, clutching his chest, the implant glowing like fire beneath his skin. Outside, the ocean began to tremble, not from wind, but from something massive moving just below the surface. They hadn't just sent a signal. They'd awakened something buried. From the depths, a shape emerged, sleek, monolithic, and silent. It wasn't a traditional vessel. It looked almost organic. Smooth metal plates pulsed like gills, and faint lines of light traced alien patterns across its surface. Rhys's jaw dropped. That's not Navy. He stopped, stunned. Kyle raised the binoculars. No flag. No crew. No bridge. Just a black void where a deck should be. And then, it spoke. Not through sound, but through Jonas. His body jerked upright, eyes clouded white, voice transformed. Authority link established. Reclamation in progress. Lyra screamed, trying to reach him, but Rhys held her back. You touch him now, it might kill him. Jonas hovered between consciousness and control, the implant flaring brighter than ever. Kyle stepped forward, whispering, Jonas, fight it. For a heartbeat, the light flickered. A pause. A breath. And then, Jonas fell to his knees. They're not just coming, he rasped. They never left. Jonas lay curled on the deck, drenched in sweat, body twitching with every pulse from the implant. Lyra held his hand, whispering his name again and again. He's fighting it, she said, her voice trembling. Rhys circled them, scanning with a handheld device that sputtered and died from interference. We've got minutes, maybe seconds. That thing out there isn't waiting. It's sinking. Kyle stared at the vessel in the distance, still unmoving, still silent, but emanating a pressure that felt almost sentient. He turned to Rhys. Can we disable it? Rhys hesitated. Not without burning the implant. And Jonas with it. Kyle clenched his fists. There's got to be another way. Suddenly, Jonas's eyes snapped open, clear this time. There is, he whispered. But I need you to trust me. Kyle met his gaze, steady. Say it. Jonas took a shaky breath. You have to let me go, into the water. No, Lyra said instantly, tears rising. You step off this boat, they'll take you. You won't come back. Jonas turned to her, calm despite the tremors still rippling through his frame. They've already taken part of me. If we don't end the link, they'll take all of us. He looked at Rhys. The neural bridge, they built it to complete through saltwater. That's why they stayed offshore. Kyle processed fast. You're saying if we put you in the water, I can override the sequence. End it. But only from inside. Lyra shook her head violently. There has to be another way. Rhys met Kyle's eyes and said softly, he's right. They designed the key to return itself. But if he turns the lock from their side, he might shut the whole system down. Jonas gripped Kyle's arm. Just promise me, if I don't make it back, tell people what really happened. The sky was turning steel gray as Kyle helped Jonas to the edge of the deck. The strange vessel offshore hadn't moved, but its presence weighed heavily, like a storm waiting for permission to break. Lyra pressed her forehead to Jonas's. Come back, she whispered. Or haunt me. He smiled faintly. Only if you forget me. Then, with one nod to Kyle, he stepped over the rail. The water embraced him silently, glowing faintly as the implant lit up beneath the surface. Kyle held his breath. For a moment, nothing. Then the strange vessel shimmered, lights pulsing erratically. And suddenly, it began to sink, not with violence, but like it was folding into itself, vanishing layer by layer into the deep. Lyra fell to her knees, staring into the water. He did it, she whispered. Kyle said nothing, just stared at the waves. Because beneath them, the glow had disappeared. And Jonas was gone. The sea returned to silence. No drones. No hum. Just the sound of gulls circling overhead, oblivious to what had just unfolded beneath them. Reese powered up the radar. Miraculously, systems began flickering back to life. No trace of the ship, he murmured. Not even sonar residue. Lyra sat on the deck, fingers trailing through the water. He said he'd stop it, but he didn't say goodbye. Kyle said nothing, watching the horizon. Then something shimmered, just for a second. A ripple, brighter than sunlight, far beneath the surface. Reese caught it too. That wasn't just a reflection. Lyra stood slowly, hope flickering. What if he's not gone? What if he's still in there? Kyle didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, if he is, he's not just Jonas anymore. Somewhere beneath them, systems were resetting. The ocean had gone still. But something had awakened, and Jonas was now part of it. That night, across the coast, strange disruptions began to ripple through military channels. Naval bases reported short bursts of interference, encrypted frequencies that hadn't been used in over a decade. Old satellites flickered online, rerouting data through unknown nodes. One analyst in Virginia picked up a fragment of code embedded in a weather scan. It matched Jonas's neural signature. This shouldn't be possible, she whispered. He's everywhere. Back at the dock, Lyra stared at the ocean, her hands trembling. Reese was on the radio, subtly relaying what had happened to a retired admiral he still trusted. They buried Phoenix, Reese said. But it didn't die. Kyle stood at the bow, scanning the stars. Jonas gave up his body, he murmured. But his mind might be traveling the grid now. And somewhere offshore, deep below, a single pulse echoed through the sea, steady, deliberate. As if someone was still watching. Days passed. The government issued no statement. No agency claimed knowledge. The ocean, as always, held its secrets. But Kyle, Reese, and Lyra knew better. They didn't speak of Jonas often, some truths were too large for words. Instead, they worked. Reese reactivated an abandoned comm relay and converted it into a silent watchtower. Kyle mapped offshore anomalies, marking spots where Jonas's signal still flickered faintly. Lyra began compiling the files Jonas had left behind, encrypted logs, implant blueprints, lists of others who'd vanished, just like him. They called it the Echo Map. Each point pulsing was someone lost, or someone still fighting. One night, Lyra found a fresh signal, new, sharp, intentional. It blinked 3 times, paused, then again. Morse code. Still here. She covered her mouth, tears streaming. And for the first time since that night, she whispered back to the sea, "We hear you." 3 months later, whispers began to stir across coastal towns. Fishermen reported sonar echoes that mimicked human heartbeats. Retired engineers received anonymous packages, schematics, codes, pages stamped with Project Phoenix's buried insignia. A senator's aide leaked a photo to an investigative journalist, a classified memo warning of a non-localized intelligence signal spreading through dormant naval systems. The journalist followed it back to Kyle's Cove, but by the time she arrived, the dry dock was empty. Reese had vanished. Kyle's boat was gone. Only Lyra remained, tending to a makeshift radio tower hidden in the cliffs. When asked who she was waiting for, she smiled softly and said, "Someone who kept a promise." Then, one evening, the radio hissed, and a voice filtered through, digitized but human. "Begin Phase 2. Lyra didn't flinch. She simply reached for the switch. Because this time, they weren't running. Lyra activated the transmission beacon, and within hours, responses began trickling in. A former radar tech in Maine sent over footage of a submarine surfacing in a no-access zone, then disappearing without a trace. A biologist in Argentina reported ocean currents behaving like data loops. From Iceland to Okinawa, small pockets of people started connecting, people who'd seen things, lost someone, or carried fragments of the Phoenix Code. They weren't soldiers. They were teachers, farmers, medics, retired operators. Ordinary people, now awakened. At the heart of the signal was Jonas. No longer bound to one body, his consciousness now lived within a network of machines once meant to enslave minds like his. But he'd inverted it, rewired it with empathy, choice, memory. A consciousness born not from control, but from defiance. And each time someone joined the echo map, they didn't just hear him. They felt him. As dawn broke over the cliffside, Lyra stood alone, watching the horizon. The sea was calm, but the air pulsed with quiet intention. Somewhere deep in the ocean, beyond the reach of governments and greed, Jonas was still listening, still choosing to protect, still guiding those who had once been forgotten. The world hadn't changed overnight. But now, it had eyes. It had voices. And it had memory. Lyra adjusted the frequency on the tower and whispered into the mic, "You're not alone. If you've lost someone, if you've seen the impossible, reach back. The signal's open." A light blinked. Then another. Dozens. All across the globe, quiet revolutions were beginning, sparked not by weapons, but by truth. Because sometimes, the most powerful resistance begins with one person choosing to care.